enjoyed your lunch. It was. Can you hear? Oh, you can hear me now. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry about that. I was speaking to myself. So, welcome to the sort of the afternoon sessions for the Harkin conference. And we're delighted that I hope everybody enjoyed their lunch. It was a lovely lunch too. And so we're ready to settle into the next session. So this session is called BenTech India, the pandemic as a catalyst for digital learning and employment in India. The pandemic was a world-changing event. And as we all join, we're going to be joining this session via Zoom. And we will be speaking to, and I apologise in advance for my pronunciation, to Dr. Mobedji, who is the leader of BenTech's Bookshare initiative in Asia and Africa, who will present on the pandemic as a catalyst for digital learning and employment in India. This talk will benefit anyone who is focused on upskilling or seeking to improve their accessibility digital outreach. You will have an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. But as in all sessions, I just have some housekeeping announcements to make. First of all, I just ask everybody to please mute your mobile phone. To make everybody aware that the bathrooms are located on this floor, please turn left when you leave the room, and they're just past the escalators on the left-hand side. In a likely event of an emergency situation, please follow the instructions of the venue staff, who will direct you to the nearest exit and safe assembly point. Please also follow the instructions given by the automated PA system. For wheelchair users, ICC staff will direct you to the nearest fire evacuation lift, and another member of staff will be there to accompany you in the lift and out to the nearest safety point. On each level there are two refuge points, one at each end of the corridor, along the evac chairs, which our staff are trained to help you with as well. So now I'm going to hand you over, and hopefully technology will work, to Dr. Mobedji. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And good afternoon to all of you. I hope my voice is nice and clear over the system.
Yes,
Am I audible, nice and clear?
Yes,
Thank you. Thank you so much. So as the topic goes, we are going to talk about a lot of learnings that we had post-pandemic. And we're going to talk about how we improved our systems and how COVID benefited us. This is a very vague statement that I'm making, how COVID benefited us. So talking about me personally, I'm a person with visual impairment. I head BenTech's programs across Asia and Africa, mainly in the developing countries. I'm based out of India, in the west of India to be precise, in the state of Gujarat, and I'm talking to you from Ahmedabad. Before I start, I would just like to have a quick understanding of the audience. So can I understand how many people with visual impairment are there in the room? If you can raise your hand, and if somebody can count and let me know, that would give me a good understanding of who's who. Can somebody count them for me?
there's no one in the room with a vision impairment.
Oh, great. So my second question would be, how many of you are involved with educating the visually impaired in your current roles?
There's nobody. I think maybe if we ask the question, is there people who are helping people with vision impairment into employment? Is there employment or training? Yes, we have two people.
Great. So this story is all about persons with visual impairment, because I specialize in that. And the story is all about educating them for a purpose. And I'll be expressing more about that as we go along. So let me start with what was happening for the visually impaired in India and most of the developing countries that I have been overseeing. And this is pre-COVID. So pre-COVID, generally, if we talk about India, the visually impaired were segregated And generally, they were being educated in special schools, which normally we call them schools for the blind or blind schools in India. The same situation applies to most developing countries where persons with visual impairment, they could be people with low vision, or they could be totally blind, born blind, or having acquired blindness. Everybody generally goes to a special school. Pre-COVID, most of them were being taught using traditional tools like Braille and audio, as generally it is synonymous that blind have to read Braille. It is synonymous that blind generally would not be able to read any other way. So this was all pre-COVID. Now, what was happening during that time, pre-COVID, was these spatial schools, because of their very traditional and exclusive way of teaching the blind, faced a certain problem. And that problem was when these children, when these students came out of that spatial institution, we found it very difficult to integrate them into the general society. Because these schools would generally offer you up to grade 10 or grade 12 at the max in terms of education. And then students had to go into mainstream schools and colleges for their further education. Now, there are no exclusive colleges for the blind where they are only blind students where you can use traditional means of teaching them using traditional methods like Braille and audio. So then, because these students had no other training, were facing a lot of challenges. Challenges in being able to communicate with people through their writing skills, because they only were able to read or write in Braille. They were not able to write in the main script that normal sighted people or non-disabled people would be using. They were not able to use the libraries within the school or the college environment because they were all printed books and they were not using digital means for reading and writing. So all said and done, in spite of being an inclusive college where their blind students got admission, these blind students were still being excluded within that environment. With this little background, let us fast forward to COVID. COVID, came a very different need. And that need was suddenly all these people who were trained only in using traditional tools had to relearn and learn digital technology to be connected with the wider world, to be connected with their school, to be connected with their teachers, to be able to communicate with people, their relatives, their social partners. Everywhere, suddenly they felt that they were completely disconnected because they did not have the right skill set. So all these spatial schools suddenly started scrambling up, and they started introducing their students and their teachers to start using Android devices because they are the most affordable, accessible, and available devices in most developing countries. These are the three words on which my entire presentation is being compiled on: affordable, accessible, and available, because that's going to be the crust bottom line when we talk about developing countries. So all these schools started distributing Android phones to their teachers and to their students. The challenge was, how do we train them? The device reached the student at his home, but the student was not aware how to use that device. Even most of the teachers within the blind school environment, especially those who are visually impaired teachers, found it very difficult to use these devices. So that is when Benetech stepped in. So let me tell you a little bit about Benetech as we go along. So Benetech is a not-for-profit organization based out of California in the US. We have a flagship program called Bookshare, which probably some of you might have heard about. Bookshare is the world's largest online library for accessible content. So we host more than 1 million books, and each of these titles are available in 5 different formats for the person to download and read that title in a way that the person prefers to read. We host content in more than 64 languages, and we currently serve people with print disabilities in more than 95 countries as we speak. In India, Benetech's operations are one of the largest outside the US. So when we started piloting this new program, we chose India as our pilot country because we wanted to experiment something which was never tried before in developing countries. So with this background and coming back to the post-COVID situation, we felt that there was an extreme urgent need for somebody to step in and connect the users, the visually impaired users, with their newly acquired assistive technology. There was a need for training them in using these tools. There was an urgent requirement for somebody to step in and train the teachers as to how they are going to deliver their day-to-day classes online using these digital tools. And Bookshare, as a library, and Benetech as an international organization, we had the expertise of doing so. So what we did was, initially when everything was locked down, early 2020, we started a series of workshops over Zoom. We started teaching people how to connect to Zoom. Now, to connect to Zoom was a challenge. So pre these workshops, we had to connect with these people using WhatsApp. So we created a training module, a short video with all the screen reader support on it. And we just recorded everything, how to go step by step and connect to Zoom. Because most of these people had somehow learned how to use WhatsApp. And WhatsApp in India is a big thing. So we started sending out these videos to all these students and teachers, stating that we are going to start a workshop using Zoom, where every Sunday you're going to learn about how to use your devices. You're going to talk about what is the importance of digital learning, what is the importance of digital reading and writing, how are you going to communicate with your teachers using digital tools. All these were a long series of workshops that we conducted during the lockdown. In fact, we have more than 90 programs which are still live or still available, I would say, on our YouTube channel, which is called India Bookshare. Most of these programs were conducted in Hindi, that's the national language. But then there are a few programs where the communication was also done in English, specifically when the participants came from certain areas of India where English is widely spoken. So once we went through these entire series of programs over a period of more than 1.5 years, then things started opening up, schools started opening, and these students started coming back to schools. So that is where we launched a major initiative called Digital Literacy for persons with blindness in the blind schools. So this was a program which was supported by Level Foundation, one of our funding partners. And under this program, we decided to transform about 15 different schools for the blind, wherein we would support them for the next 3 years and provide them the training for starting to acquire the skills for digital reading and writing. Now remember, these are schools for the blind. They're not very well-off organizations. They are generally run by charitable trusts, where the students would be residing within the organization in their hostel, and they would be taught also within the same organization by the special educators appointed by that particular trust. So the biggest challenge was, how do we start? Because the need of the hour was reforming or resetting the mindset of the teachers. Teachers who had been using traditional tools for such a long time and had not acquired or mastered the digital tools. There was a lot of resistance amongst these teachers. Many of them said, why should we leave Braille? Some of them said stated difficulty in learning new skill sets. So what we started was, we went to these schools and started conducting teacher training programs for using assistive technology. This was our first step. It took us time. It took us time to convince the teachers that using digital tools is the right way forward. And I'll explain why. Why is digital tools the right way forward? The reason is, as I explained earlier, the challenge that we saw, that when students came out of these special schools, when they went into the mainstream society, they were not being included because they didn't have the skills to read and write digitally in a way that non-disabled people could understand. That is one of the reasons why most of the students were forced to take up only subjects like humanities in their colleges. They were never offered subjects like STEM, that is maths and science. They were never offered subjects like commerce or any other disciplines that they would have their interest in. They were only forced to take up humanities. When all the students just went into humanities, that created a different challenge. When these students finish their academic training, how are they going to be employed? Who's going to employ them? Because they, remember, do not have the right skill for reading and writing. Pre-COVID, all the students were using scribes to write their exams, read a limited supply of Braille books, or some audio notes created by their friends and volunteers. So they did not have the skill to read and write digitally. And for any employment opportunity where blind can be employed, it's paramount that the person should be able to read and write digitally to be included in an organization for doing meaningful work. So, coming back to the situation, we explain these to the teachers. That see, you are educating children, but this education is not leading to employment. And if it is not leading to employment, it is high time that we start introspecting and looking at the failures. Why are our children, in spite of being educated, not being employable? So when these when these teachers got convinced and they started adopting these new tools, came the second challenge. In an ideal world, I would believe that providing a laptop to each and every child and the laptop having a screen reader installed on it should be the best way to read and write. But remember, we are talking about developing countries. We are not talking about many developed countries. Resources are scarce. Hence, we had to come in with a solution which was affordable, accessible, and easily available. So keeping these three words again in mind, the best solution that we found was the Android device. For example, India has a very high penetration of Android devices. In India, most of the households would have at least one Android device in the house. In India, it's also seen that generally people accept Android very easily. So with all this in mind, we said, let's incorporate the Android device as a reading and writing tool. Now, as we all know, Smartphones can be customized. There is a screen reader on the Android device called TalkBack, which can be turned on. And using TalkBack, any person with visual impairment can be trained to read. He can log into the internet, he can download content, he can read content, he can communicate with people using WhatsApp and other social media, he can use his email. Everything is possible. But the biggest challenge was writing. Because on a touch phone, even persons who are non-disabled find it difficult to type quickly. Imagine for a person who's using a screen reader, he has to listen to each character and then lift his finger, and then that character is being typed. So it's a very slow, tedious way. And that cannot be considered as an efficient way of writing. So what we did was connected these Android devices with a very simple, normal USB keyboard. A normal USB keyboard which we connect with our desktops, the same one. And it is very affordable, extremely cheap. It would cost you about $3 to $4 in India. So when you connect these Android devices, your Android phones or your tablets with this keyboard, we are actually transforming it into a mini laptop. With this in mind, reading and writing became super efficient. Now came the third challenge, and that was India being such a large country with so many languages being spoken. There are so many languages in which students would be studying. There are vernacular languages, and state-wise these would be different. Like if you go to the south of India, people would either speak Tamil or Malayalam or Kannada or Telugu. If you go north, many states would speak Hindi. But if you go in the west, then there would be Gujarati, Hindi, Punjabi. If you go in the east, there would be Bangla, Odia. So there's so many languages. And generally all these blind schools are vernacular schools. That means English would be the second language. The students would be taught in the local language. Hence, they have to read and write in the local language. So the biggest challenge was providing them content in their language on their phone. Again, Bookshare, being the largest organization in the world which deals with accessible content, came in, and we reconverted all the digital materials required by the students in these schools in their local language. These would be textbooks which were prescribed by the local education board in that particular state. So Bookshare would pick up all the textbooks, reconvert them from inaccessible PDF to an accessible EPUB and put it up on Bookshare. So once you have these titles on Bookshare, any student sitting in any corner can download these books extremely easily. And because these are digital files, the size of the file is extremely small. For example, a 500-page book would be barely about 1 MB in size. Now, when we are talking about content, there's certain advantages when we are using digital text compared to Braille. And these advantages would be in Braille books. Generally, images are stripped off. You do not have any images embossed in Braille because it becomes super expensive, very difficult to print, and there are very few printers available which would be able to handle images. So generally in all Braille books, you will never find any images. On the flip side, if you see the textbooks, especially in India, most of these textbooks have a lot of images in them because they have been designed from a very sighted perspective. So when you remove all these images and the information which is portrayed from these images, you can expect that the visually impaired person is left with a lot of deficit when it comes to understanding that subject. So with the introduction of these digital textbooks, what we could achieve was we can retain these images and we can provide them with alt text, that is alternative text. Now this text is hidden behind the image. So when a screen reader reads the book, it will pass over the image and it will capture the description of the image provided by the editor and read that to the visually impaired person. If a person with low vision is using the same book, he can zoom into the image, magnify it, and also have a look into the image. The teacher who might be non-disabled, who could be a sighted teacher, can still use the same textbook in the classroom and be able to understand what his or her students are reading currently. So it was a very inclusive way of teaching. Now everybody is reading the same textbook, the sighted teacher, the low vision child, and the blind child. Another advantage of these digital books was we could now teach STEM subjects, that's maths and science, to the students using these digital books. Because with the current technology, with its advancement, reading equations is very easy using digital books. You can actually navigate within an equation. For example, if it's a square plus b square is equal to z. So you can actually navigate using your arrow keys on your keyboard, and you can say a, and then it will say to the exponent of 2, and then if you press right arrow, it will say plus b, and then so on and so forth. So even a visually impaired person can still understand complex equations. They could be fractions or they could be radicals or any sort of equation. You can easily teach the visually impaired. With this, we had to add one more component. We made content accessible. We made devices which were accessible. We made them, the students, able to write in their local languages using the keyboards. But still, for a visually impaired person, especially who is blind, totally blind from birth, it is very important that concept learning happens by touch. And there are certain concepts like maps, for example, or science diagrams. If a child touches that diagram, which is made in tactile, then the child will be able to understand it much better. So with the advancement in technology, today you can emboss these diagrams using different methods and create a lot of diagrams very quickly at a very affordable price. And these diagrams can then be shared with the students. So if he's reading a geography book, if he's looking at a map where the map of India and the neighboring states of India is being described, he can put his hand on that tactile book where the map of India is shown and where all the neighboring countries are being shown, and he can put his finger, and the teacher can also explain to the child that this is India, and to his north is Nepal, and to his east is Bangladesh, and down south is Sri Lanka. So the child gets the understanding and will be able to visualize the image. So tactiles plus digital books makes an efficient way of learning. So with this introduction to digital devices, we solved one more problem, which was one of the biggest challenges, and that was making students write their own exams. Remember pre-COVID, I said students had to depend on scribes to write their exams. And writing with scribes is not at all an efficient way of writing. Because sometimes what happens, the scribe might not be as efficient as the blind student. The blind student would dictate, but the scribe is not able to cope up with that speed. And sometimes the blind student does not even know that the scribe has just left a few sentences or a few words or made spelling mistakes in his writing. And ultimately, when evaluated, the student fails due to the mistake of the scribe. And this is very common. So with the scribes in that system, in fact, if you look at it carefully, you're not evaluating the blind student, you're only evaluating the scribe. But with this new way of writing, by connecting your smartphone with your keyboard, you're actually able to evaluate the student, because there is now the students who is going to write, and that is exactly what is going to be read by the examiner or the teacher. Even during your regular classwork, when the teacher gives assignments, now the child is not depending on anybody else to write for him. The child goes home or back into his hostel and writes his own assignment, and will now be able to email the assignment to his teacher. So you're removing all the dependencies, and actually all this together is creating or preparing the child for future employment, because that is exactly what was missing in the first case. When we saw initially, students were not able to read and write digitally, hence they were considered not fit for employment. But now with these new skills, they can choose different careers. They can go for subjects like sciences or commerce, and they can prepare themselves for lots and lots of different job opportunities. In fact, in India, there have been 183 different job roles which have been identified where persons with blindness can work, and these are spread across 27 domain sectors. Imagine 183 different job roles. The problem was we did not have the right candidates for this. Now, with this new introduction of digital learning, reading, and writing, in the next few years, we should be able to have a cadre of students who are capable or would be having the right skill sets to read and write, and be hence be employed in these different job roles. Looking at this entire system, the transformation that I mentioned, people ask, is this scalable? The answer is yes. In any developing country, because this is a low cost system of transforming the life of a child or a visually impaired person, it can be implemented in any developing scenario. With more and more digital content being published, for example, Kindle from Amazon. If you look at Amazon content, more and more titles are now coming with a tag on it called screen reader supported, if you have looked at it carefully. So when you look at this tag, screen reader supported, that means this title can be opened by any visually impaired person on any device that supports Kindle, and he or she can read them and even take notes from that. Similarly, I said Bookshare being the largest source of accessible content. We have over 1 million books, and we keep on adding more than 8 to 10,000 books every month. How do we do that? It's because we have partnered with more than 980 international publishers who directly donate their titles to Bookshare in an accessible format so that they can be downloaded and read by any person in any country that is supported by Bookshare.
Sorry, could just 2 more minutes before I'm going to ask some questions? Is that okay?
Perfect. I'm absolutely at the end. So with all this in mind, we urge organizations, especially the funding organizations who are supporting education programs in developing countries, to take this into note. Because normally what happens when funding organizations support a country, especially in the field of education, they have a lot of money pumped into the system. But when it comes to supporting persons with blindness, there's very little which these organizations can provide. But with this new information, with this new system, any funding organization can actually make a lot of impact when they go into any country. They can work with both non-disabled and the print disabled in the field of education. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm open to questions now. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. And we'll open the floor for some questions. Just 1 second, we'll just get the mic for you. I think we need the mics for people who are maybe online as well, so that's just 1 second.
Thank you very much for your talk, and firstly I'd just like to say that it's a fantastic initiative, and I think you're giving agency back to children with visual impairments, because as you say that you know, it's not a scribe that's doing the thing for them, it's them that's actually getting to write their own interpretation and their own answer. I was going to ask you, I'm very interested in how organisations like this, NGOs and non-for-profit organisations, deal with challenges or barriers, and you talked a little bit about some educators who were reluctant to leave behind traditional tools and take up the assistive technology that you've been supporting. So I mean, could you give us an insight into how Benetech and your work, you sort of work with educators and try to overcome those barriers?
It was difficult, but perseverance is the answer. Because when you keep on explaining the benefits of digital technology to the educators, and when you especially emphasize that by using digital technology, it is going to reduce their workload as an educator, it makes sense to them finally. For example, when everything has to be converted into Braille, the educator had to literally write all those sets of copies individually, because in India, Braille production is expensive. So the only way the teachers had to make multiple copies for a classroom, for example, of 10 students, they had to make 10 copies by hand by using the stylus and the Braille board and typing each set of whatever assignments they needed to us. Now with this simple technology, they can just create one set in a Word file and share it with their students via email or Drive or whatever is the medium which has been selected by the institution. Similarly, researching has become so easy for the teachers now. If they want to compile some notes from the internet, from some resources, they just need to copy, paste, and create their Word documents and send it to the students. So with all these little improvements that we showed to the educators, it slowly deemed upon them that using technology is the right way forward. And the most important game changer was the students. The students latched on to technology super fast. And that happens everywhere. Sighted, non-disabled, disabled, every student, when you give them access to technology, they're more than happy to accept it. And when these teachers and educators saw that the students are going away using technology, they had to sort of follow suit and jump onto the bandwagon and accept technology and learn technology. In many instances, there were students who went back and taught the teachers how to use certain functions on the devices. So that was the game changer. Did I answer your question?
Most certainly, thank you. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? Okay. Well, we're actually nearing time as well, so it's just good at this point to say. So we really like to thank you for your presentation. I found it really useful and informative, and it really shows how through technology you sort of have created independence for people with visual impairments and inclusion, and also looking at employment and moving into employment and looking at careers and new types of careers. I think you talked very much there about sort of looking at new STEMs topics and things like that that previously people would not have thought of. So I really found it very useful. I'd like to thank you again for your very informative presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
website after today as well. So thank you. So I think we're moving on now to the next room as well. I think there's 15 minutes break to get to the next room. But thank you once again.